order for August 11th. Zoe has pulled up the agenda to share with everybody. And we as the commissioners are really looking forward to this conversation. We do know that housing certainly is a major social determinant of health, and we are very interested on all of the activities that are taking place or planned activities that are going to take place in our hospital district around housing. My dog's going to help me present right now. So, so with that, I think we'll just go. I think everyone's been invited. Everyone is aware of who everybody is. So I don't see that we have any visitors in the presentation at this point in time. So Zoe, I'll let you kind of kick it off and we'll get going.
Wonderful. Well, I'm so glad to be here and very glad to have the opportunity to all learn from each other. This has been a wonderful group to work with. So I feel very grateful to live in a community that includes all of you. Wanting to make the most of our time, we are probably going to need to keep at a pretty quick clip here. And so I'm going to ask that we try to keep questions till the end as much as possible. So if you can keep track of questions so we can make sure we get through each presentation. And there will be a combination of slides and kind of verbal updates from each of these presenters you see here. And I'll let them introduce themselves as well when it's their turn and kind of keep us on pace, so to speak. So the first person I'd like to introduce, and this is a kind of a long and funny story, but is Enterprise, who I had the pleasure of working with in my previous role around some Medicaid transformation work that was happening in kind of the greater region. And they're a great player in identifying how housing and healthcare and other partners can work together to really improve healthcare outcomes. And so I kind of had reached out to Jess blindly from their website as the kind of Pacific Northwest contact, and was very pleased to find out that she's actually a resident of Edmonds and that has a lot of kind of connections to the public hospital district and has been really fun to work with. So Jess, I'll let you kind of introduce yourself and Enterprise and kick us off here before we move into our city folks.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Zoe. And sorry, my the sun comes around right at this time of night, so I've got shadow on my face. But yeah, as Zoe mentioned, I'm an Edmonds resident. I served on the Edmonds Housing Commission, so this is and I'm a lifelong or career-long housing advocate. Worked in affordable housing design and development for many years. So this is a big thing for me. Zoe, did you want me to present and then, or do you want to, or were you going to do your intros after?
I was going to just start kind of like each piece, if that makes sense to folks, and then we can kind of go from there. So first being Enterprise, and then we'll hear from the individual, so the county, and then each city kind of around the plans. But thinking in addition to that pre-recorded and prepared written materials, Enterprise is such an expert in understanding kind of the framework and the logistics, so to speak, of what this can look like. Sure. And so thinking that could be an additional like fantastic kind of context setting before we launch into hearing the individual municipality plans.
Yeah, and which view can you see right now?
You see a lovely woman with a walker and health and housing.
Is it kind of cut off though?
A little bit.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm not great at doing the presentations.
If you want to, let's see.
Get it to...
What button do I press? I guess is my question to make it.
So
you should be able to hit the like a slideshow tab.
I think
up at the top toolbar.
Okay, so which one can you?
Now I see several.
You see. Sorry, guys.
Well, I think.
Is that?
You want to email them to me, Jess, and I can take a shot?
Is this better? Does this show one slide at a time now?
I see like a preview of the next slide, so they're pretty small.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see if we can.
This looks good. Whatever you just did looks good.
Okay. Is this? Oh,
It's not cut
Can I
off.
Zoom share?
Yeah, that looks good.
Is this like the full screen of the
Yeah.
lady? Okay. Great. Thanks. So thanks for your patience, everybody. You know, in a year and a half of working from home, I don't think I've had to give a PowerPoint presentation on Zoom. So new adventures today. So as Zoe mentioned, I'm with Enterprise Community Partners. We are a national nonprofit focused on housing. Our vision is a country where home and community are stepping stones to more, and our mission is to make home and community places of pride, power, and belonging, and platforms for resilience and upward mobility for all. We are focused on sort of a number of different ideas, and we do a lot of different work all across the country. I'm in our solutions division, where we're working on solutions and programs around affordable housing. We have a policy shop. We have a whole capital division that works on low-income housing finance. And then we also, sorry, brain fart. So we have kind of, we also are an affordable housing owner and developer in the Mid-Atlantic, not here in the Northwest, but where we were founded in Columbia, Maryland, and around that area, the Mid-Atlantic area, is where we have, we own and operate housing. So we call ourselves an end-to-end platform. So we're working on everything from policy to actual, implementation. So I think you have been studying the connection between healthcare and housing, and you probably know very well some of the outcomes that we see when people who are housing insecure are able to access housing, and we see those impacts in the healthcare world. So this is a study from 2016 from Enterprise around health and housing, and they looked at specifically issues with expenditures and outcomes when people who were people who are homeless getting access to housing, and what kind of impacts that has. And I can send you all of the links to any of the things I'm going to reference today in the future. So and I think you've also seen this, the research is showing that all of these outcomes and social determinants of health improve with access to housing. So this, I don't think, is any news to you. Zoe asked me specifically to talk about sort of discrete opportunities that the hospital district can take advantage of or participate in as we are, as you sort of are exploring your strategic planning and working on thinking about how the hospital district relates to housing in the future. So the first one of those is investment partnerships. There's a number of different ways that the hospital district could potentially connect in the investment of affordable housing. There's everything from actually participating in low-income housing tax credit investment, which is low-income housing tax credits are sort of largely the biggest way that affordable housing, income restricted housing, is built in the United States. And it's sort of what replaced the funding mechanisms for public housing in the 80s. So it's a really complicated and wonky road that I don't think I'll go down with you all today, but I think there's definitely opportunities there. There's lots of great examples of, and I know that Verdant is not an HMO or an insurance company or hospital itself, but there are opportunities, or there are great examples of those kinds of organizations putting together funds and investing in funds in affordable housing. So that's sort of what we're talking about when we're talking about investment partnerships. I think there's also the opportunity for partnership around providing respite care housing. So one of the things, one of the great examples is a project, a partnership in Denver where the Denver Housing Authority and the Denver Health Department basically partnered to create respite housing for folks without a home who need to exit the hospital to be able to access care and sort of that next step before they are released from care. Because as we know, hospitals have essentially a moral imperative to keep people who don't have anywhere else to go, which is a big cost driver. So if we can provide these folks a place to stay as they continue to get better, there's sort of a better pathway to health outcomes and potentially housing outcomes. So that's sort of another partnership opportunity as an investment that's a potential. Prescription for a home is a policy idea that is being worked on among some state legislative representatives right now, that's really looking at the opportunity for essentially getting doctors to be able to write a prescription for housing. Since we know all of the benefits that housing can have on homeless folks, then and on their health outcomes, then seeing it as a way to essentially be funded through the healthcare system, through Medicaid, through Apple Health. So I know that as a public agency, Verdant can't necessarily lobby, but to let you know that there is a coalition that is being formed right now that if you would like to be a part of sort of shaping how this might look, I'm happy to connect you with the folks who are working on that. There's definitely some great opportunities there. Let's see. Service provision. So I think that that respite care piece is a great example of how this might of how service provision could work. Another example is Verdant could be part of a housing development, being part of a ground floor commercial, as we say, like when you have what we call a 501 development, where we have an apartment building that has commercial on the ground floor and housing above, you could have community health provision in that ground floor level with the housing above, and have access to that from for the residents. Excuse me. And then finally, the idea of land. So my main initiative at Enterprise is called the Home and Hope Initiative. And we are basically working to catalyze the development of affordable homes with community facilities on publicly owned and tax exempt land. So the work that we do is aimed at finding feasible sites, finding feasible partnerships between public entities, private nonprofit entities, other tax exempt landholders, and partnering them with housing providers and other community service providers for the provision of homes on that publicly owned and tax exempt land. So this, the images here on this slide are an example. This is actually the neighbor care health in the top left. It's the Neighbor Care Health up in Northgate on Meridian. And adjacent to it is a large parking lot that's actually owned by the county, King County. And we have been in the process of looking at the feasibility of developing housing to go on that parking lot. The housing would be permanent supportive housing. So it would support folks who are exiting homelessness. And then they would have access to this federally qualified community health center right next door. So they have that wonderful nexus of opportunity to be able to take care of their physical and behavioral health needs right all in one great little spot. So this is an example of what could be possible with land that Verdant might own or acquire. So there is a law on the state books that was House Bill 2382 that essentially allows public entities to make their land available to affordable housing developers at low or no cost. So essentially removing any requirement that a public entity might have had in the past to dispose of land at market value. So basically it puts that public land to the public benefit. And this can have a pretty significant impact on a project's feasibility. So this is a graphic from an Urban Institute report from 2019 about what nonprofit hospitals and health systems can do to invest in affordable housing. And if you haven't read this report already, it's a really great read and has a lot of great examples. But and I apologize for how small the words and numbers are on the image, but essentially the idea is, you have a variety of sources and uses in affordable housing. One of the big uses can be acquisition costs. And so what this graphic is showing is the impact that land donation and low interest loans can do, like what that impact can be on affordable housing feasibility. So on the left, this is no hospital investment, no investment outside. The middle graphic is showing what happens when the land acquisition costs go to zero. And this is a really sort of basic development sort of capital stack, but I think, and it's also not indicative of what things cost here. So I'll just preface that, but the land acquisition can be a significant piece of the cost of the project. And then, having some low cost loans that might be available if there was other financing, then takes the gap on that project down to a really reasonable number. So in places like Snohomish County, where public resources are very limited for affordable housing finance, things like land donation can make a really, really big impact. So that's kind of a really fast overview. I think I know that there are a lot of sort of resources, papers that I can send later on, but I think and please let me know if you have questions at the end, but these are sort of some really big ways that we can make an impact. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Jess. And I didn't even plan that. The Meridian Center for Health was one of the sites I supervised when I was at Neighbor Care. And I spent a lot of my last year actually serving in a variety of interim roles. So I saw that photo and it did my heart good. That's a wonderful, wonderful example of a partnership like this. And it is a facility that actually has a community health center. It has public health King County, their WIC and other programs, and it has Valley City's behavioral health all co-located. And it is a very cool model of even within that clinical services location, how you can integrate services in a new way.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And I do think, thinking back through, we had this kind of preview, so to speak, of kind of why are we in a crisis? And I think most folks watched that video and most have seen the data from Chris Collier, right? Really suggesting that we are in kind of a unique situation in terms of how little housing stock there is and the huge difference between housing costs and wage levels. And so I think as that kind of preface to this, it's to say, what are all the levers you can pull to increase housing availability, right, across the spectrum of all these different types, permanent supportive housing, low income housing, just increasing supply, right, in the face of such demand. And knowing that most folks are, and I think you've seen this as well, Jess, and looking at kind of projections that for Snohomish County, it is thought that a lot of that bolus of population increase in the next decades will be in the South County as people continue to move out or further away from the King County urban core.
Yeah. And I think what's really important too is to think about this even on a more holistic level of, land here is at a real premium because we are geographically limited, because of our geography, we don't have the ability to spread out in the way that other places might. And that's why land is so expensive. And that's why building is so expensive. It's part of the reason, but I think, sort of even on a more holistic level than that, it's really important as we think about climate change and we think about suburban sprawl, like we want to ensure that people can afford to live close to jobs and services in places that they don't have to drive a car. And so like that's a sort of another layer of health that we're talking about too. So I think there's a lot of really great arguments to be made about why these kinds of developments are super important to encourage in what is essentially like a first ring suburb. I'd say South King County is essentially where I live is 15 miles from downtown Seattle. Right? It's not very far, and so I think as we're thinking about our region and as our region expands, like we really want to make sure that we're concentrating development and access to homes and services in sort of those urban cores. And we are truly in sort of an urban space, even if we call ourselves suburban.
So thinking through that, and I put one slide trying to keep it brief from kind of the Sound Transit's 80-80-80 plan. So if, as we have a few minutes here, how do you want to talk briefly to that concept of like where there are opportunities or legislation or mandate around the development when you've identified either publicly resourced or potential surplus properties and how that's being addressed locally?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the pieces that is a really great opportunity is this requirement for Sound Transit to make their surplus land available for affordable homes. And so the 80-80-80 is 80% of the land available to, I always mess this up, 80% of the units have to be affordable to people 80% area median income and below, right? So essentially ensuring that the transit-oriented development that happens after Sound Transit has completed their construction is, prioritizing our lowest income communities so that, access to transit and access to sort of all this mobility around the region isn't limited to higher income folks, right? Only rich people. So so there's been a lot of work around, making sure that so between 80 and House Bill 2382, the Public Lands Bill, that's really trying to prioritize affordable housing as the main the go-to sort of development opportunity that is made sort of available when there is surplus land. So I'm not sure where the county is at, and maybe MJ, I'm not sure if you have insight into this, but King County, actually the state has they do an annual surplus land inventory and look at what land might be feasible for affordable housing development. And so that's where, we can come in and say, we have resources to help figure out that feasibility. And then we can also help match make with partners to find the right fit.
And then one more question, and then I will let you off the hook here and move on to MJ. I know we have an area here in Linwood, close to where I'm sitting in Verdon's office, that has been designated an opportunity zone. Do you want to briefly talk about what that means in terms of development?
Sure. So opportunity zones were created with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that former President Trump instituted upon his arrival in office. I think it's an opportunity for people to park capital gains and gain a benefit from that, to be able to write them off by investing in low-income communities. Opportunity zones are they're sort of divided up by census tracts. They're all across the country. Every state and county had the opportunity to identify various opportunity zones, and so they are typically what we call qualified census tracts. So they have a certain proportion of low-income folks. I think opportunity zones can be tricky in terms of whether they actually create a good impact on low-income communities. We've seen opportunity zone investments go to things that don't actually positively impact low-income people. So there are I think since its inception, there's been a lot of work to try to change that and make sure that it works for the way that it was intended. But so it's, it's another opportunity for investment in low-income communities.
Excellent, thank you. So I'll just say there's lots of kind of funders and partners and people doing work in this arena already, and that I think, our area in South Snohomish County has been kind of identified by many as an area of opportunity outside that specific designation of kind of creating more housing that would be accessible to a broader kind of income range of folks. Does that feel like a fair statement?
Yeah.
To sum that up? Okay, awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And I appreciate your expertise here. And like Jess said, we can send anybody any of the great materials she referenced. I put a few pages from Enterprise materials in the read ahead packet just to kind of provide some of that context ahead of time. And they're a great resource. And so moving forward, I'm now going to pass the baton, or I'm going to hope Tammy W can also help me pass the baton over to MJ. And it's been fun to work with MJ. And the goal here is also learning about the Housing Affordability Regional Task Force, or what's been called the HART Plan, which was a county-wide effort, and kind of starting at that level before kind of zooming in on the individual cities. And I am going to see here. MJ, do you have, I think if you hit slideshow and start presentation will be golden.
Let's see, just did a share screen here. So let me, I'm sorry, I don't know what to
I'm
do.
so glad I'm not the only one.
I have no
Guys are
idea. I've
doing
got,
fantastic. Or you can send them to us and we'll share a screen and play them. There's on the toolbars, file, home, insert, design. If you go over to slideshow, kind of keep.
I'm sorry,
going
you're
over.
speaking way too quickly for me. I'm sorry.
You're doing great. You want to email it to me or share screen again and I'll talk.
I had emailed it to actually a different version of it earlier. Want me to see if I can email that again?
Perfect.
Okay.
And while she's doing that, and I'm happy to share screen and kind of drive, so to speak, we can also kind of, MJ, if you want to do a brief introduction once you hit send there, and then we can talk through the county level plan.
Let's see if I can do this in, I better do it in PDF. So, okay, let's see if, no, I don't need that. Send anyway, please. Okay. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you all, and it's great to have an opportunity to talk with you today. To all the commissioners, I'm Mary Jane Bril-Vujovich, Director of Human Services at Snohomish County. The Human Services Department invests about, in a normal year, about $150 million a year in a wide range of human services from prenatal to end of life. About a fifth of that goes into housing in an ordinary year. Right now, we have a significant infusion of resources due to the coronavirus and some of the federal legislation that has been being passed. But that is temporary one-time resources. And we will be going back to a sort of reduced amount of resource to invest in housing after the pandemic passes, which will hopefully be soon. Building housing takes a village. It takes a whole bunch of, as Zoe said, a whole bunch of partners being involved in this activity. And it all begins always when you are talking about developing housing, as Jess said, it always begins with land. You can't build anything without land, and land is at a premium in the South County. So I think that that's really critical. We've had quite a bit of information from various partners about the intersection between housing and health, between housing and educational attainment, opportunities, basically lifelong opportunities. And in fact, the zip code into which you're born is probably one of the best determinants of how your trajectory through life, something we would like to see change with to become more equitable. So there is a widespread recognition in Snohomish County that we are struggling with access to affordable housing and that being built. And so I was going to start by talking about what the Housing Affordability Regional Task Force is and what the purpose is. So what are the housing challenges? You've heard from Chris, but I'll just kind of give you a brief overview on that. What are decisions that were made by, who is the Housing Affordability Regional Task Force? What were decisions made by that group? And while this was also developed for the Community Services Advisory Council, to give you food for thought about where you might have an interest in having a potential role in this creation of a village. As Jess pointed out, low-income tax credits are one of the largest funders of housing, but a lot of times you can only get those tax credits if you're showing a local commitment of local resources, and those can be governmental as well as philanthropic, but basically a stamp of approval that your local community is behind you in developing a particular housing development. So let's go on to the next slide. The mission of HART was that it was to collaboratively develop a 5-year action plan that identifies priority for county and city governments throughout Snohomish County to accelerate our collective ability to meet the housing affordability needs of all our residents and set a foundation for continued success. What's really critical is that the county and virtually all the jurisdictions, all the municipalities in the county came together to say, we've got a shared problem. What was interesting in some of those early meetings is the shared problem is maybe not being experienced at the same level in Granite Falls as it is in Linwood, but there's a growing recognition that this is becoming a challenge throughout the county. So why? Let's go on to the next slide. Well, first of all, again, all the cities and tribes were invited to participate. 14 cities in the county were involved. Each members were elected officials and they had alternates who could participate with them. And County Executive Dave Summers and Linwood Mayor Nicholas Smith chaired the effort. So it was a joint effort. And all these folks on this next slide are just showing you, and again, this will be forwarded to you. What are all the entities that provided information to the county and the municipalities in terms of making their recommendations? So a wide range of partners coming to the table and bringing their perspective on what were the issues that were contributing to the lack of affordable housing. So what are our challenges in Snohomish County? We can keep rolling. First of all, the population of this county is growing very, very rapidly. It's going to grow from about 840,000 now to well over 1 million by 2040. So that's a significant growth, which in and of itself would create a tremendous housing construction challenge. Beyond that, okay, next slide, please. The cost of rent and how rapidly rent is rising, given that we do have a housing shortage compared to how income is rising, the rents are rising much faster than incomes are rising. And this has been an ongoing challenge. These are data up through 2017. I was just looking at data today from 2020, which make it all look worse. For efficiency or a studio apartment right now, the fair market rent is $1,600 and change a month. And the hourly income that would be needed to afford that and not be housing cost burden, I know Zoe gave you that, which is that you're not spending more than 30% of your income on rent plus utilities, would be over $31 an hour. Just to put that into perspective, right now at the federal level, they're talking about raising the federal minimum wage to less than half of what it would take to rent a studio apartment in Snohomish County. Raising it, because right now it's substantially lower. This state has one of the highest minimum wages in the country at over $13 an hour, but still not even close to half of what it would take working full-time to afford a studio apartment. And it is more challenging in South County and along the I-5 corridor than it is in other areas of the county. Next slide, please. So one of the things that is contributing to this and is often not looked at, because we talk a lot about building housing, but we are losing what is called low rent housing. That is housing that rents at $800 a month or less faster than anywhere else in the country. So we can't build our way out of it without preserving some of what we have. And the units that are being lost are largely being lost because there's market pressures there, which include redevelopment of land and just rising rental costs. I think it was just in the paper earlier today that with the rent increase aspect of the eviction moratorium being lifted, that renters are already seeing that as soon as their leases end, huge jumps in rents that will be taking place here in Snohomish County, that even for people who have been able to pay their rent, will put them at increased risk. So this loss of low rent housing stock is a huge issue. On the next slide, please. And again, looking at the most recently sold homes in this county, less than half of them are for homes that are affordable for people who are at median income. So it's not just a rental issue, it's also a home purchasing issue, and less than half of, there's a mismatch between what is the median income and what are homes selling for. We can keep rolling. And again, just while the development was keeping pace in the years after, immediately after the Great Recession, that has stopped, and we are no longer, the development of housing is no longer keeping pace with growth in this county. I'm not going to spend time defining affordability because I think in the pre-reads and everything Chris provided, you have had a lot of this information, but I will stress, and this is something that in the Heart group that folks struggled with, is affordability is a concept, it crosses all income spectrums. And that is that regardless of what income you're at, you're not having to pay more than 30% of your income on housing, which includes rent or mortgage plus utilities. So that problem exists across the spectrum. Of course, at the lower income levels, the consequences are much more dire and much more dire in terms of health outcomes, because people are having to make choices like keeping a roof over their head or getting their child health care. So at the upper income levels, those challenges are a little, they're significant, but they may be less dire in terms of health outcomes. The lower the lower incomes people have, the more you need government subsidy in order to bridge the gap between what it costs to build housing or what it costs to rent housing and what people make. And so up to 80% of the area median income, by the time you hit 80%, you're pretty much looking at market value. But anything below that, when we talk about affordability, it doesn't mean that the housing that's being built is affordable to people at that lower income level. It means that they have to get gap funding to fill that gap between what it costs to either buy or rent and their income. So this is significant, as you can see that we've got a large number of people in Snohomish County at that lower income level with needs of some form of subsidy or relief in terms of housing. Some forms of relief are things like rent controls. Every form of relief has its challenges, every single one of them. But just to kind of, this was a very sobering slide for all of us working within the HEART group. Right now, for no household to spend more than 30% of their income toward housing, oh, there's an S on that, I never put an S on that, Snohomish County would need 127 units of additional affordable housing by 2040. We're not building it anywhere near that rate. So very sobering statistic, and as you can see, significant amount of that is for people who do not make close to the median income for this county. Many types of households are struggling. I mean, there are instances, we can see where, for example, at the 81 to 25, 125%, post-secondary teachers and nurse practitioners can have trouble being able to afford housing here. So a lot of information in this slide about who's having trouble affording, but the point here is it crosses occupations, earnings. It's also, if you don't already own something in Snohomish County, unless you are a very significant income level, you are, you will be challenged to find affordable housing. We can keep going because I know I'm on the clock here. So key takeaways: housing supplies not keeping up with population growth. A third of our counties are cost burdened. There are housing cost burdened households at all income levels. And it is particularly challenging at the lower income levels. We can keep rolling. There's a lack of middle income housing, townhouses and duplexes. Being able to look at how do we infill and still retain the characters of our cities, and I think our city partners will be talking about some of the challenges they face there. We'll have to build faster than we're building, and there are three ways in which local government and I would say commissioners can be looking at engaging in this. And that is, what are the policy and regulatory actions? I think, as Jess said, you're not in a position to lobby, but certainly be able to make folks aware, providing funding, providing land, and community outreach engagement. I think we still have a lot of residents, and this came out over and over and over again in Snohomish County, who do not understand we cannot accommodate growth without having more density in some areas. The choice is not between staying as we are and growing. It's between having planned growth and unplanned growth. And unplanned growth is not pretty. If we can keep going. So again, the group identified early action items, which included working with the housing authorities, because they really are a major developer of properties. Each jurisdiction looking at how they are spending some basically sales tax rebate monies that have come back. A lot of the jurisdictions are choosing, and several of the jurisdictions in the municipalities in South County are collecting these funds, but are probably helping to pay primarily rent with those funds right now. Again, they elected said they would lobby for change in the laws that would enable more consolidation and streamline of funding. There's a lot of rules and regulations that raise the cost, slow down the development and raise the cost. Review and consider recommendations from existing toolkits to engage communities. I cannot for me, this was one of the big take. How do you talk with your residents and constituents about how we have to do this work? Foster community conversations, engage all the private sector partners, confirm and support an ongoing structure for regional collaboration. And this has been held up a little bit for the pandemic, but it is still a key effort on behalf of the partners involved in the hard work. And do I have any more here, Zoe? So that is a high level overview. Wanted to say we do have some additional sources of funds coming in to the county now, but for a lot of them, we don't know how we're going to be able to use them. But the time is ripe for dialogue for how we potentially can use those resources in conjunction with our other municipal partners and partners such as the hospital district to figure out, again, it takes a village and it all starts with land. If there's two things I've learned in housing, I would say those are my two main things. So hopefully we can all be part of the village and work on this significant challenge to our county together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, MJ. That was champion effort getting through that. Thank you. And one thing I always, I think of when I read all these statistics, and I always want to remind folks, particularly in the healthcare world, where we can be accustomed, I guess, in our area to people who qualify for Medicaid, for instance, or for Medicare, getting it, right? So if you qualify, you should be able to get it, and how different that is from housing. So housing is not a guaranteed benefit. And so what we find, and was in the pre-reading, is that only roughly 25% of people who are eligible for some sort of housing subsidy get one. And that is because there is a set bucket of money, and it hasn't really been increased to kind of match that demand. So it's really different when we think about what we would call entitlement programs. This one is not based on demand. And so I think that is something that's also really important to think about, is that in the absence of that kind of universal provision of income qualifying or situation qualifying housing subsidies, it's a really different reality than many other kind of essential services, so to speak. Thank you, MJ. We're gonna get through this for Cliff, and I love it. And Brad, I see you're on camera now. And do you want me to share your slides, Brad, or are you ready to go? Oh, it looks like we're ready to go here. All right. And Brad, do you want to do a brief introduction of yourself, and then we can kind of dive into what's going on in the city of Edmonds?
Sure, just get myself off mute here. I was talking, but nothing to say. So I'm Brad Shipley. I'm a planner with the city of Edmonds. I've been with the city for about 8 years now, primarily working on sub-area plans, area planning, form-based code, but a lot of future visioning for the city. So Edmonds has been thinking about the idea of housing for some time now. I started back in 2010 as a consultant for the city when I was working with the Green Futures Lab out of the University of Washington. And then I was hired by the city in 2014 to help them with a comp plan update and also sub-area planning for the Highway 99 corridor. I'm going to talk about a few things today. We're going to kind of talk about the process of maybe some of the background data, kind of what are our housing needs, what are we seeing. This is going to be a very high level view. Then I'm going to talk about some of the city efforts that we've gone through over the last 10 years. Talk about some of affordable housing incentives that are geared towards development, and then talk about a couple of local housing projects that are for affordable housing. So for the background data, this was prepared a couple years ago when we were working on a housing strategy. You'll see on the bottom end of the screen, you have the different categories of income. So you got extremely low income on one side and all the way up to moderate income. And what you're looking at here is how many households are cost burdened by their housing. Nearly 1 in 3 households in Edmonds are cost burdened. That's about 6,000 households. And 2 out of the 3 cost burdened households are to low to extremely low income households. There's a severe lack of for income or income restricted housing to meet the needs. If you look down here on the bottom of this graph, you'll see these numbers in yellow, and that's how many units we have in Edmonds to meet the needs in green. Also, our housing stock is not aligned with the housing needs. This is a couple different things. One, a long time ago, household size was much larger on average. And then also, the land cost here in Edmonds requires that it doesn't require, but if a developer is going to turn a profit on $500,000 piece of land, they're not going to build a $100,000 house on it. So 70% of our households have one or two members in the household. Yet only 11% of the housing units have one bedroom or less. So we're seeing that the housing stock is not necessarily aligned with needs right now. There's a few reasons for this that I already outlined, but another one is that we're also having changing demographics. You folks being in the health field, I'm sure that you understand this, but the baby boom generation is quickly going into retirement age. The oldest of the baby boom generation is now 75 years old. And in Edmonds, 22% of the population falls into the 65 plus. For comparison, in Snohomish County, only 13% of the population is in this bunch. So we have a lot of small households, an aging population. And to be honest, one of the things that I hear quite commonly from folks who may have owned their house for the last 40 years is that they would love to downsize, but they don't want to give up their quality of life that they've become accustomed to. Second thing is we adopted a zoning code for the first time in 1959. I don't think many people realize how recent zoning code is and that we're in the middle of a grand experiment. If you're in our historical downtown, there's a lot of missing middle housing. Missing middle housing is, the housing that you see in the middle of this slide here. They're duplexes all the way up to live work type units, townhomes, cottage housing. All of these are housing types that were really popular about 120 years ago, before zoning code eliminated the ability for them to be built. So now 75% of the city's land area is dedicated to one housing type. That's detached single family homes. It doesn't even allow townhouses. As you could also see from this slide, that many of those missing middle housing types fit in neatly with the form of single family homes. I think that multifamily housing has received a bad rap over years, either to do poor design standards or government housing that concentrated poverty. Now that's kind of a brief overview of some of the issues that we're looking at. I want to talk about some of the city efforts that we've attempted over the last 10 years. First, we wanted to go into some of our sub areas and look at them and see, are these places where we could add more housing? It's already near commercial. So you could create a walkable neighborhood where you could go get your groceries, you could go to the restaurant, you could go to a nail salon, and get all that done within a walking distance. This is Westgate, and I'm not sure how familiar everybody is with Edmonds. SR 104 or Edmonds Way takes you from I-5 all the way down into downtown Edmonds. Westgate is where PCC and QFC, Goodwill, Rite Aid, what was formerly Bartell's, a couple of restaurants, a bank. There's a lot of different uses there. We weren't seeing any housing though. And mainly is because the zoning for that area was neighborhood business, which really is an outdated zone that promotes strip mall type development. Low scale, large setbacks, so you get all the parking out in front, which is something that many of us are used to, but I don't think many people understand how it destroys walkability and the overall feeling of safety within the public realm. So in 2010, we started this process. Finally, in 2015, a hybrid form-based code was adopted by the city. And we've recently, maybe about 2 or 3 years ago, we had our first development in there. It's partially done by Bartels, and they redeveloped the parking lot. I don't know if you can see my cursor over on this side. That's a project I'll talk about a little bit later. Then in 2017, we started the Highway 99 sub-area plan. So this was a look at the whole sub-area. You guys are probably pretty familiar with Highway 99. It's getting to the point where we're going to start to see redevelopment along this corridor. A lot of the uses are either vacated, or the land use or the land cost, or I'm sorry, the land value is now exceeding what is actually being utilized on the land. So before development started, we wanted to get in there and make sure that we're building a place that the community values. It is no longer looked at as, sorry I say this, but I live in this area, so dumping ground for the rest of Edmonds, which is kind of the bias that has existed for many years. We asked the community what they want. Affordable housing was one of the top items. They also want it to be cleaned up. They'd like connections with their sidewalks and bike lanes. They want to have destinations. They also want to have businesses that are catering to today's market. Safety and walkability. These were all some of the top priorities for Highway 99 sub-area plan. Part of it was to make sure that the public realm does promote a place where people want to live. You have to look at how people interact with the buildings, creating buffers between the fast-moving traffic and the sidewalks. While this doesn't directly get at affordable housing, it does talk about healthy living. And if we're going to be putting housing in this area, we want to make sure people are also able to live healthy lives. Once we completed that, this city council created an implementation action within our comprehensive plan that to develop a housing strategy by 2019. The charge was to increase the supply of affordable housing and meeting diverse housing needs. We started that process with Burke Consultants out of Seattle. They created a draft housing strategy and had 6 main objectives that they had come up with through this process. A lot of it centered on just increasing the amount of housing. We need to densify. As I talked about earlier, 75% of our land area is dedicated to one housing type. There's not enough housing diversity, and it's really next to impossible to build anything affordable on a standard single family lot these days. So expand, encourage development of multifamily housing, expand housing diversity in the missing middle, support the housing needs of an aging population, increase the supply of income restricted housing, and then participate with Snohomish County to reduce homelessness and provide protections for low income tenants. You'll notice that the title of this says draft. It's because we never advanced beyond a draft. The community was not happy with these objectives. They felt that they wanted to have something more community driven. So council at that point decided to establish the Citizens Housing Commission, which was made up of 15 commissioners and 7 alternates. 2 individuals were representative of, so the city was basically broken down into the census tracts, and 2 individuals were selected out of each of those, and then 1 at-large position. It was a fairly diverse group. I don't know if it's entirely representative of the city, but I think that there's a lot of diverse viewpoints that were shared. They started this in, I want to say, late 2019 and finished in January of 2021. They made 15 final recommendations to the city council. These range from anywhere from increasing single family or missing middle housing. They're looking at allowing cottage cluster housing and detached dwelling units, also expanding the multifamily tax exemption program that we have. I'll get to that in a little bit. develop an interlocal agreement with Hasko, and then a few others, multifamily design standards, so revamp some of those. And those are some of the main ones. City Council established an ILA with Hasko. They took pretty quick action on that one. This would allow Hasko to operate within the city of Edmonds. Currently, they own and operate 3 properties within Edmonds. 2 of those serve seniors and persons with disabilities. There's about 88 units, and we have a 100+ person wait list for those units. Third is the third property is an income generating. It rents half to people with incomes below 80% AMI. And currently 94% of those units, though, are being rented to people making less than 80% AMI, and half make less than 60%. They're only required to provide 50%, but they're trying to keep rents low on purpose. And we felt that they're a great partner. They're the ones that are able to do this kind of work. So we did establish an ILA with Hasko that allows them to expand the work that they do within Edmonds, and it allows them to provide extra housing within Edmonds. City Council, about a month or 2 ago, decided that they're going to select 5 of these recommendations to study further. These ones were cottage cluster housing, detached dwelling units, so basically expanding some of the missing middle. Develop community housing partners, something that we kind of already do. Multifamily design standards, which doesn't quite get at the expanding the number of housing units, but it does talk about the quality of the housing units. And then somewhat redundant, eliminate discriminatory provisions in the covenants. State law already allows that to be removed. This is going to be more of an educational piece. So City Council discussed, and they decided that they want to move forward with these 2. Multifamily design standards, and to educate the public on eliminating discriminatory provisions and covenants. I don't know if either of these really get to their initial charge. I think that this graphic here basically shows how difficult it is with some of the local politics. I'm not saying that this is the end. I sure hope that once the new council is on, that they're willing to pick up some of these items, but it is very difficult out there with the politics and the preferences that people have. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of the incentives that we have. Multifamily tax exemption. This is allowed within 2 targeted areas highlighted here. One is Westgate, and the other one is Highway 99 sub area. This is a 12-year property tax exemption for qualifying new and rehabilitated multifamily projects. It primarily targets the 80 to 115% AMI households, so all the way up to moderate income and down to 80% AMI. It doesn't really touch on where we have most of the needs at the lower end of the scale. And then impact fee reduction. So this helps lower the cost of developing housing. Now, so far, we've only had 1 applicant for this, even though it's been in effect for close to a decade. What it does is it allows affordable housing developers to reduce the cost by either eliminating or significantly reducing the impact fees based upon what type of development they're developing. And then a couple of key projects I want to highlight here. This is the Westgate Village. This is the project that was came out of the Revisioning Westgate project. This is 91 units. It's over 3,100 square foot of commercial space on the bottom. And it does utilize the MFTE program. So 20% of the units must be affordable to low or moderate income households. Next project is out on Highway 99 and 234th. This is 192 units. It's also using the MFTE program to provide housing for low and moderate income households. And then this one, we don't really have too much on yet. I'm sure a few of you are familiar with it, and I know it was in the write-up. but Edmonds Lutheran and Housing Hope are working together to provide housing that actually does meet the needs for the really low income households. They're planning 52 units. It's going to provide supportive services along with those units. At least 50% of them are going to be affordable to people making 30% AMI, and the remaining will be affordable to people making 50% AMI. Hopefully we get more of these projects. I know that there's going to be another MFTE project coming on line here pretty soon, again on Highway 99, which is probably where we'll see most of our development. But there's a lot of work to be done. And I think definitely a lot of work to be done on the lower end, a lot of work to be done politically. I know it was mentioned earlier, but I think if local cities don't act, the state will. And I hope that cities are able to drive a vision for themselves and not have to rely on the state to be heavy-handed. That's basically all I have for Edmonds. I'm going to provide my contact information. If you guys have any questions, feel free to reach me. I know we're also working on a Highway 99 renewal project, so that also gets back to making it a place where people want to live, improving health outcomes. And that's the project that we're currently working on, not directly tied to housing, but more about the livability of the place.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Brad. I appreciate that. Great context setting and data. Thank you so much for representing Edmonds.
Yep.
And moving
Hey, Zoe,
now. Yes.
quick question before we
course.
move on. Can we get copies of the presentation sent to us afterwards? Okay.
Absolutely. We're kind of collating them. So we'll be sending those out. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks. Great. Thank you, Brad. And now we have Edith. I see you are on camera. We're moving to our lovely town, city of Mount Lake Terrace. And Edith, do you want to kind of quickly introduce yourself and talk about what Mount Lake Terrace is up to?
Sure. I'm Edith Duplinger. I'm the senior planner here with the city, and I'm going to do what everybody else has done, almost except for maybe Brad. I'm like going, okay, where's my slideshow?
No worries. And I can share it too if you want to email it over. End of the day, we're just like a test, right? And do it in front of all these people.
It was here. And, you know, I have the laptop. I have my other one. I keep confusing which one is the touch screen and, you know, use the finger pad, and which one is the keystroke. I'm like driving around like a crazy person. Yeah, I don't know why it's not showing though, because I have it up.
You want to email it to me?
I can do that. But I'm disappointed by having to do that because I know that this will work here. So let's see here. This is because my computer is behind me here. All right. I could have done this a long time ago if that's what I was really wanting to do. Okay. Sorry about that.
No worries. If you want to start chatting, I will. It always takes a second to come through on email, and then I'll screen share as soon as I get it.
Yeah, I guess I'll just start with just commenting about that. I think we're all hearing the same things, with the bottom line being that this is really a difficult issue, and there are no easy answers. There are no cheap answers. There are political and social conditions that are making it more difficult. All right, here we go. Send, there we go. And if I kind of go backwards, I'll say this before I start because I might forget, which is that townhomes are the most popular housing type that is being constructed in the city of Mount Lake Terrace. We have virtually no single family subdivisions occurring or that have occurred in the last 10 or 15 years. They have been planned unit developments where they're looking at smaller lot sizes. They are all targeted at single family home ownership, but that's not the same as the traditional subdivisions that I think Snohomish County deals with more. The concentration of redevelopment has been around the town center. That's been spurred a lot by the light rail coming in. I'm sure anybody who's driven I-5 recently in the last 3 years has seen what has happened at the 236th Street intersection. The housing that has been built is not affordable. I think Mary Jane, you said that it takes $1,600 to rent a studio. And yep, that's what those units there are renting for. I could not go down there and pay the rent for a housing unit. So do you have the slideshow now?
Hasn't come through yet. Does it's showing as sent on your end?
It says it's not deliverable. So that's because it's too big. Yeah, it's because it's too big. So like I say, let me see if I have it down here.
The screen that I see right now, I see like your necklace. So I think the screen that your camera is on, yeah, the one that you just moved down.
Right, it's that. Why wouldn't it show on? There it is. Oh, I did it. Let me
Progress.
see. Let me try that again. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Just go to slideshow on the top.
Yeah, I know I've lost the screen now. Oh, there we go. Screen. I'm gonna do. It says I'm screen sharing, but it's
We
not.
can see it. Yeah.
Yeah, you just need to get.
Oh,
this-
you can.
Yeah.
Oh, there it
You just
is.
need to start the slideshow. Yeah.
Start the slideshow. Look at that. Okay, and then it has this other thing here where I don't need this other slide thingy. Well,
It's
does
fine.
it? It's, oh, I guess I don't want to do that. Yeah, I'm not going to worry about that. You guys can all peek at the slides coming up, which, so the city, as you know, is located. Let's see, there we go. South and west of Edmonds and Linwood. So we're 4 square miles. We're pretty well surrounded by built out development. The city's been 65-35, that's single family residential percentage compared to multifamily. Pretty much through its history. It's varied a little bit, but it's interesting that that mix hasn't changed too much, although that will definitely flip as we are seeing intensity and redevelopment in the town center, which is this purple area that is just to the right of the I-5 corridor. So the city incorporated in 1954. It was built as low-income housing. They were concrete blockers. They were, I think, representative or of the kind of housing that was built back then. 900 square foot houses, 3 bedrooms, 1 bath in the city of Montlake Terrace, pretty large lots. So we had single family homes on the large lots. There were a few multifamily complexes that were allowed in limited locations, kind of on the periphery of the city, as far away as they could get from town center. They had density caps on them. And then we had planned unit development regulations that allowed clustering, open space, and design standards. And a couple of those projects took place in the early part of the city's existence. And this was supposed to be, there we go. So in looking at the housing challenges. In 2005 to 2008, the city really was starting to address whether we had an adequate housing supply to meet population growth. We wanted to provide opportunities for employees to live close to, to be able to work in the city and live in the city. We are a city that exports its employees elsewhere, even though we have virtually as much job opportunity here as people are commuting out. We have an older housing stock. Most people don't really want to retain a concrete block home in perpetuity. There's been changes in household sizes and demographics, and Brad spoke to this. We don't have quite the percentage of 65 and over, but close. I think it's 18% in Montlake Terrace. What we are seeing is an influx of younger people and people who want, young families, but also a lot of millennials who want to live near the town center and are looking for housing there. But in any event, these were kind of the factors that were driving the interest in opening up the housing options that the city had. So we're not just going to have single family, and we're not just going to have sort of these periphery multifamily. It was looking at how do we provide affordable housing to all economic segments and just provide some diversity in residential densities and housing types. So the things that took place kind of fell into three categories. We increased the housing type diversity, we added development options and incentives, and we amended the bulk requirements. And as you see here, the city actually was recognized for that. And Brad, and having worked with Shane, will recognize the force that she is in supporting long-range planning efforts. So, and she was with the city of Montlake Terrace at this time. So the housing types that were added were the ADUs, cottage housing, mixed use in all commercial districts, and the townhomes. So the ADUs are only allowed in single household dwelling, but you can do them as either attached or detached. They previously had been limited as mother-in-law units, but the idea was to support what at that time was already an aging population to be able to stay in the community. Most of these people have lived here for 40, 50 years, and they are not interested really in relocating. A lot of times they can't afford to relocate. And the idea was that they could generate rental income in order to be able to stay in the community by constructing a smaller unit. It's 40% square footage compared to the primary residence. And you would retain the neighborhood character. And whether that was family members that would be living in the accessory dwelling unit or the primary unit or not, it was definitely targeting people being able to stay. And I think it's kind of funny that at the time we predicted that we would have 6 ADUs applied for per year. And you would think that there would be more ADU interest. And we talk to people whenever they come in and when developers come in, and we recommend that they make that accommodation, even if they don't want to build it into, if they don't want to lease it out or, use it that way right now, but to make provisions for it. And we're averaging about 6 ADUs a year. So, you can lead the horse to water, but you can't make them take advantage of it. Another option that was added into the code at that time was cottage housing. And that required that you combine at least 4 lots. You could double the number of homes. There were design provisions that went with it. We have had 1 cottage housing development constructed under those regulations. That was 10 years ago. And we have 1 that is almost through the permitting process. So in all that time, we've had 2 Mixed use in commercial districts, that has been much more successful. There was a lot of resistance by the lending segment to support mixed use. The commercial part of it is something that they don't even figure into the repayment needs on when they're building these things. It is that's just not part of the equation. They build it only because they have to. And our perspective on that has been that that's fine. And in fact, we've made some changes in our regulations that you don't have to occupy it as commercial, but you have to build it as commercial, because until you have sufficient density with residential occupancy, you can't support the commercial uses. And what we hear from residents over and over again is what they want is a place to go get something to eat. They want to have a pub. They want to have, mostly it's just eating and kind of socializing locations. A grocery store is a big one that people would like to see here. Personal services, those are the sorts of things that you're going to see in this area. As much as we would like and feel like office uses would be a good complement next to the light rail. And then down to the townhomes, that is definitely a way to substantially increase density. And we created a transitional district around the perimeter of the town center so that it was considered kind of transitional housing. And I'm going to say the jury's out on whether or not people are going to view that as being transitional housing. When the community sees how that manifests itself in the real world, they may be rethinking the design standards for those developments. And Brad, you talked about this a little bit about, how it looks. And I think that is one of the things that's really key to any of these more intense developments is how does it look? How does it function? Not just can you build it, so that it's cost effective. But if we don't create housing that is something that people find attractive, they're kind of not vested in living in it and maintaining it. Let's see here now. And the next one, is that my right slide there? Yep. So the second arena was in development options and creating incentives. So we reduced lot sizes. The smallest lot size had been 7,200 square feet. We went down to 4,800 square feet. Again, in this area that was really concentrated around the town center. And those three colored areas that you see on that one map, those are kind of flanking the town center. And the idea was that it would encourage redevelopment of the older housing stock by achieving 3 homes on 2 lots that are combined. So most of the lots in the city are sized such, and we picked as minimum square footage based on the maximizing being able to take 2 lots and create 3 new single family homes, or maybe only 2 if you were able to retain the other one. Another one was fee simple ownership, where you would create a subdivision that uses small lots, but the subdivision property itself is the parent lot, and then within it, you create ownership. So it's kind of like a condominium, but it's where you have ownership of the land underneath the unit. The multifamily tax abatement, we adopted that in 2007. It sunset in 2011 and then was extended to 2017. We had a lot of interest in that. In fact, it was the only kind of multifamily development that took place. And then when light rail was imminent, coming in through the city, we no longer needed that as an incentive for housing. We continue to get inquiries about it, but there's no reason for the city to offer it. If we're only doing the 8-year, which is what we had, there's the 8-year tax abatement. You have to go to the 12-year in order to include the affordable housing element of it. We also created a transfer of development rights, regulations, and then of course, not that we created light rail, but there was a lot of negotiation to get 236th Street be a station along the light rail route. And it has made all the difference for this community.
Edith, I just want to do a quick time check to have probably just a few more minutes.
Okay. Then we amended the bulk requirements. You hear this a lot with all kinds of things. Reduce the setbacks, allow increased lot coverage, make changes to the number of parking spaces that you have to have. We removed density limits and adopted performance-based standards. So if you meet the requirements for setbacks, height, and storm drainage, and all the other parameters, you can build whatever will fit on the site. Sometimes you find out that things that you adopted in the code are counterproductive and can actually zero out the things that you thought were going to make things more affordable or buildable. And design standards, I think they're really important, but they can also interfere with creative development. Let's see here. Limitations, demand and supply, obviously. We have quite a shortage of one or the other. We also need to be mindful of that. We can't make people do the right thing. And profits are driving a lot of things. We don't control those. People buy below their means. And that's why we end up with regulated housing, pay a living wage. I don't think we're going to get to $31 an hour, but and some way to direct the market to build smaller housing units. You know, houses are almost triple the size that they were in the 1950s, and yet we have only half the number of people living in a household. And then, let's see, some things that I think we need to consider is in some of the multifamily developments, it's to require car sharing options so that you can just eliminate more and more of the parking, which is so terribly expensive. Construction, a lot of people object to living in multifamily housing because they hear their neighbors. There's better ways to build things that provide people with the privacy that they look for when it's detached housing. Integrated developments, you know, we need to be looking at ways to incorporate housing diversity in neighborhoods as opposed to concentrating it in a single development. And there's a number of ways that could be done. Political acceptance of higher density housing. And, you know, the emergence efforts to look at healthy living, we do need to ensure that we protect the open spaces that we have and that we develop them for purposes of people being able to enjoy them. If we're going to have higher density housing, we need to have more open space and opportunities to be outside. And then the partnerships. Let's see, and I'll just let you read that and I won't comment on it any further. But if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. By the way, this is the development on 236th and I-5, and you can see the light rail construction on the right side. We're looking to the south here. This is a panoramic, so it's distorted.
Thank you so much, Edith. And I'd love if you can save those as a PDF or email them to me so I can share those out with everybody. That would be wonderful. And thank you so much.
Yep.
All right. And last but certainly not least, we have the city of Linwood, and we're going to have Kristen and maybe Ashley as well joining us to talk about what's going on in Linwood.
Thank you. I'm assuming you all can see my slides. Okay, great. So as Zoe said, I'm Kristen Holdsworth. I'm a senior planner here at the City of Linwood. I'm also joined tonight by my manager, Ashley Winchell. So if you have questions that stump me, I'll just point over to her. But together we've been working on leading Linwood's efforts for a housing action plan. And I'm going to share just a little bit about what that is and then what we are looking into going forward. So our housing action plan was adopted this past May, and it is basically a menu of options. And it creates the menu of options for the city to promote housing that's safe and affordable for all of our community. It addresses housing costs for every segment of the market. So again, looking at that 30% level of affordability. So it's not just a low income housing plan, although that is definitely a need in our city and the region. And so when we're talking about affordability, we are using that federal definition of 30%. Our housing action plan builds on a lot of the work we've already done in the region, and it's in line with the housing affordability, the HART report that MJ mentioned earlier. Our mayor, Linwood Mayor Smith, actually helped co-chair that effort. And I'm really excited to announce that when we were doing an early evaluation of where our housing action plan should go, we'd already implemented all of those early action items and over half of the 5-year items. So we really used the HART report as a springboard to then look at what other efforts the city should be focusing on. We also are part of AHA, which is the Alliance for Housing Affordability. Most of the cities in the county participate, and it's really a knowledge sharing resource for the cities in the county to help. It's for elected officials as well as staff to kind of bounce ideas and best practices off of each other and make sure our efforts are aligning. So we've done several things, and when we were evaluating what we needed to do in the housing action plan, we found a lot of our low-hanging fruit options had already been done. So we've adopted an MFTE or multifamily tax exemption program. We've done some process improvements. We also had done code updates. So even despite all of this, we were still having a lot of challenges, and we're not alone in the region in that. And so there's really two sides to this housing challenge. One is the cost of housing. And in Linwood, when we control for inflation, our housing prices from 2010 to 2018 rose by 40%. Meanwhile, our wages were essentially flat. You can see a little bit in 2015 where it starts to come up again, and we think that may be because Seattle had increased their minimum wage. But this is a real challenge because housing prices are skyrocketing compared to what people's actual spending power is. And we repeatedly have had community conversations where it's just not the same to buy a house now or to try to pay rent now as what it was 10 years ago, let alone 20 or 30 years ago when housing was much more affordable despite really high interest rates. And why does this matter? I think you all probably know this. Jess did a great job setting it up. Brad has mentioned it too. But simply put, housing costs are a major concern for all of us, not just those that are affected and can't afford housing. We need housing options that are safe and affordable for everyone in order to have a strong, solid economy and a vibrant community. So studies show that children who lack stable housing options do worse in school, are less healthy, and that it just overall is not a good situation. We also hear repeatedly from our business community that it's increasingly difficult to hire and recruit and retain employees because they're having to drive farther and farther out in order to be able to afford housing. We also know that if people are spending more than 30% of their income on housing, they're being forced into really difficult choices in terms of healthcare, childcare, and other necessities. And then in Linwood especially, we have a lot of families who would either like to downsize because they no longer have children at home, but they can't afford to. Or there's families that have adult children that are starting to have children of their own, and they would like to raise their kids near grandparents, and that's just not a feasible option for them. So we had a lot of conversations as we were working to develop our housing action plan. We put together a really fun engagement strategy, and then 2 weeks later, COVID came to the US. And so we had to really pivot everything we did. But we worked throughout the course of the year on 3 main engagement rounds to hear from the community, both developers, builders, nonprofit organizations, residents that are renters and owners, our faith community groups. We had a broad coalition that we listened to and that we intentionally did outreach to. So we went to, this was Mr. Rogers in the neighborhood telling people about housing challenges at our Halloween Hullabaloo event. We had a summer camp that the kids were all masked, and so we did some information about housing and asked them to help us envision Linwood's future. Then we went to the food banks and used a Snow Isle library to help get the word out about the project. So during our last round of surveys, we collected over 700 responses, and the demographics of the respondents roughly matched the demographics of the city. And Linwood is increasingly, we're growing rapidly, and we're also increasingly diversifying our population's demographics. And so this was really encouraging to see that we had a broad community voice that was reflected when we were considering options. And we heard from the community that historically Linwood's been considered affordable, but that more and more people are worried about being priced out. And we also heard from a lot of people that they would like to live in Linwood, or they previously lived in Linwood, but it's no longer attainable for them. We also heard a desire for more housing variety types, smaller units, units that were attached to each other, that maybe provided more backyards or privacy. And so we heard a lot of these changes would actually be somewhat accepted, but it came down to the details of it. And then we also heard a lot of great ideas that aren't necessarily the city's direct role to implement. So the idea of partnerships was really important. And we've talked about housing as a puzzle that has a lot of pieces. And so everyone has a piece that they need to put in order for it to work for the entire region. So I'm going to quickly go through this because you will have the slides, but we have 4 main goals for our housing action plan. We want to produce housing that meets the needs of our community. We want to preserve existing housing that's affordable and safe. And this is really important because if we lose existing units, that is more expensive to replace. And so preserving and keeping safe the units we have is a high priority. Partnering with others to achieve these goals, and then preparing for continued growth and increasing quality of life. So I love the way MJ put it, is it's not a choice between no growth and growth. It's a choice between proactively planned growth or a response and reflective action. And so we can either choose to see what our vision looks like and shape it, or we can kind of manage the chaos at the back end, which I don't think it's more expensive and more frustrating for our residents. Our plan has 10 strategies to implement these goals. And if you've driven down I-5 or visited the Alderwood Mall, you may have noticed Linwood has a lot of cranes and a lot of construction going on. We have one light rail station that's coming in that'll open in 2024, and another one will be near the Alderwood Mall in the next 20 years or so. So I do want to highlight at this point that planning matters. So a lot of what we're seeing that's going up right now was actually put into plans in 2020 or early 2000s, but the market wasn't ready for it. And so really being visionary in what we think the city could look like, or the South County region, is really important when we're thinking about this. And then there's the need to get it right in the market so that actually what we think can be built will be built. And we also recognize with light rail, it's a really significant investment, but that growth and the changes may not benefit everyone equally. So we have included measures in our plan to address some of those negative impacts, and we recognize that there's a lot more work that we need to be doing as a region to have those discussions. So I'm going to highlight a little bit just about some of these strategies. Strategies 1 through 3 are really about changing our development code. So making sure that we're putting people near transit because we want to see the ridership used by those who need it most. And also making sure that we're providing housing options. So in Linwood, we have a lot of single family housing. You'll see the same image. I think all 3 of us may have shown you the missing middle image. So we have a lot of single family housing, and more recently we've had more of these mixed use developments or 5/2 structures where you'll see residential on top of some structured parking. These structures are really important. It's not to say they're bad, because they're going to help us put people near transit so that we can get that investment utilized, and also because they help accommodate a lot of the growth. So a structure that has 300 units is a lot easier to permit and build than 300 individual projects. But there's a whole nother layer of housing that we need, and it's called the missing middle because it's not being developed much right now. In Linwood, we actually allow a lot of these types of units, but we have what staff affectionately call gotcha moments. So we have certain things in the code that make it difficult and cause barriers to develop those units. So one of the things we heard loud and clear from our residents was that these missing middle housing types would be great. So people would like to have a unit that their kids could live in when they turn 30 and are trying to figure out kind of what the next stage of their life is, and trying to save up for ownership opportunities. Or they'd like to be able to move from a multi-story to a single story structure in a community setting, but they don't have that option. And so we're working right now to revise our code and to streamline our processes. I also wanted to point out, so we have a lot going on along 196th, and so here's just some developments that we're seeing. This is the Merlone Geyer property, which is going to be immediately north of the transit station. There's a lot of different uses. There's residential and commercial that are proposed to be built out over the next 20 years. And then this is the Cosmos building, which is one of the tallest multifamily residentials that we've permitted recently, and that's over near Alderwood Mall. So in regards to our strategies, we know that partnerships are essential. And so really strategies 5, 6, and 7 are a lot about working with others. And we've already highlighted some of the challenges with financing, but I did want to show this slide, and I can take no credit for it. Our consultants developed it for a South Linwood neighborhood plan that we're working on. But really it breaks down the different types of housing by the area median income. And really when we get higher levels of income qualification, the market typically will provide that on its own, and we can adjust with some codes to make some facilitation easier. But it generally does a pretty good job of producing it. We definitely need more units. As MJ was saying, we're not keeping up with the growth overall in terms of the number of housing units. But when we get to about 100% or below of the area median income, that's where there's subsidies required and it's much more difficult to develop. And then when we get in the 60% range, that's where a significant amount of subsidies are required. So this under 100% is kind of that break line. And this image shows that if you were to develop market rate housing, you don't need any additional subsidies. But as the level of affordability gets deeper, so going to 80 to 30% of the AMI, the amount of that gap funding that you need gets significantly more. And so this shows, you know, if we don't have enough of the market rate housing and we're squeezing people out, every time we're squeezing people out, it's becoming more and more expensive to make it up with those income restricted units as well. And so it really shows that there's a lot of partnerships that are needed, a lot of layered financing strategies. One of the things that we also want to point out is some of our housing providers that are in this 80 to 30% AMI range have noted to us that they rely on federal programs to help with their financing packages, and generally those do not allow for any funds to go towards housing of undocumented households. So those households that are undocumented are frequently left out of any additional efforts we're doing in this realm of building income restricted units. So they end up being doubled or tripled up in a single unit because that's the only way they can find affordable housing. So there's additional health consequences there too as well that we are considering. And I'll talk a little bit more about rentals in a minute. So partnerships here are also really important, just thinking about where housing is located and if there's a co-location option for services. So healthcare, food options, childcare and amenities next to these facilities is really important. And the last strategy I want to highlight tonight is our rental registry program. And this is not something that's established. It's something that we've heard from the community as a strong desire. As a planner, I hear concerns from the public. I answer the phones and am at the front counter again. And I've heard concerns about unpermitted backyard cottages that spill sewer into play areas for children. I've heard about black mold, fires. We've recently seen in Florida, there have been challenges with structures. And so all of these are really serious health hazards. But renters are afraid of filing official complaints with the city, and the city really doesn't have an official complaint process right now. And we're not alone. A lot of Snohomish County cities don't have any sort of tenants' rights advocacy groups that are organized within their city, or any sort of reporting mechanism for unsafe rental conditions. And so renters are concerned that they'll either be retaliated against and have their rent increased, or that they'll be evicted if they inquire or report any unsafe living conditions. So the city is considering the development of a rental registry program where housing would have to be proactively registered, and then we would go through and do periodic inspections proactively. So it didn't rely on a complaint-based system. So it addresses some of those equity concerns, and we would really be focusing on life safety. So less concerned about the color of someone's house or whether their grass is at a certain level, but checking to make sure smoke detectors work, that there's the basic life necessities are met. And so we anticipate this program will need a lot of research, a lot of fine tuning, and a lot of discussion. And we're not opposed to talking with other cities about doing it region-wide, because we recognize this is a huge benefit for our existing residents. So that's just a couple efforts that Lynnwood has going on right now. I will go ahead and kick it over, and we're happy to answer any questions, and I'll send Zoe my slides. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kristen, and for representing Lynnwood so well. And so that is kind of the end of this. I don't even know how to describe this rodeo of housing, but it's been a lot of information very quickly, in addition to that video and documents that we shared ahead of time. And so I think we do want to provide this brief time for just those kind of questions that are top of mind, as well as the acknowledgement that there's always follow-up that can happen to individual presenters, collectively, whatever commissioners would like to see that would be helpful, but wanting to provide the opportunity now for any questions you may have.
Thanks, Zoe. I definitely want to thank all of the presenters this evening. It's been very great source of information for all of us. So I'll go around the commissioners to see if they have any comments or questions. I'll start with Dina. Anything, Dina?
I'm still thinking. Can you come back to me?
Okay, you'll take a pass. Kariana.
No questions, other than I think it'll be helpful to be able to review these presentations after this.
Okay. Jim, top left corner. Oh, you're on mute, Jim.
Thank you very much. No, I really appreciate all the presentations, and I'm struck by the range of responses among the various cities and communities within South Snohomish County. A whole range of actions and lack of action sometimes too.
Great. Fred?
Well, I'm just really amazed at the scope of the problem. I think that, one of the things that I have forgotten is how prevalent it is. I drive to Seattle all the time, and I see all the tent cities, and they're always the other people, In fact, they're not, they're our neighbors. And they show up in our emergency rooms, and they show up in demanding on social services. And I think that this board is really keenly aware of the fact that homelessness is a marker for health. And we do have to do something, but I am, almost, the analysis has almost led to paralysis here, because it just seems like, the problem is so big that it's going to take a lot of creative thinking and coordinated efforts. And I just hope that we as a community are up to the task. I really do. That's what I got to say.
Thanks, Fred. Back to you, Dina.
Yeah, I was struck by first Jess's presentation, because it was very specific about things that we could do. And then MJ's about the heart, and the fact that there had been all this looking and analyzing of all what was going on in our district. And then I listened to the three cities. One of the things that struck me is they also had done the analyzing, but they were not able to move forward in trying to change what people were thinking. I live in Linwood, so I mean, I am aware that Linwood is in a huge amount of change right now, but it really strikes me that one of the pieces is that if as long as we can't get people to understand the need for housing and its connection to children and wellness and all those pieces, I don't see how we're going to be able to move forward, because as someone said, you can't force people to do something easily. So I want to read these pieces more, because I think it's very helpful to see and I took lots of notes, but it will be very helpful to look and see exactly what has been done. But I'm most concerned about how, even as we pick out projects, how we make the people comfortable with that, and it doesn't become a NIMBY problem for us. So that's just my viewpoint.
Great, thanks. Yeah, the complexity of the issue is just mind-boggling. It's really hard to wrap our hands around it and really come up with easy solutions. I noticed that Briar in our single family home. You have a reason? Okay.
I do.
Okay. It wasn't represented in the presentations. So obviously we as a board recognize the homeless issue that's taking place in our community. We are, concerned about that, obviously, due to the health implications of that, but specifically around what a public hospital district can do with our regulatory or WACs that were placed upon us, the hospital district. We have some limitations, and so I'd like to have Brad Berg, our legal consultant, maybe step in and just provide just a brief summary of like what we can do as a hospital district and what we can't do. Brad.
Happy to do that. So as most of you know, 3 or 4 years, well, actually longer than that now, 5 years ago, the public hospital district statute was amended to expand the authority of public hospital districts to not only engage in activities that we would think of as traditional healthcare in terms of operating hospitals and other types of healthcare facilities and providing hospital services and other types of healthcare services, but also to promote the health and wellness of the population served by the public hospital district. And that was partially done in response to concerns that the state auditor had raised about some of the activities of Burden in terms of whether it was going beyond the scope of the authority. So given that amendment, I think the Burden now has broad authority to engage in activities that fall within the scope of promoting the health of the residents of the district, which would include certainly some types of housing. Now, I still think that there needs to be a connection between, for example, housing and health, but as the speakers have identified, it's very easy to make that connection in most cases. So I don't think the statute is necessarily going to be a limitation on what the district is able to do. I think will be more a question of policy in terms of how you want to use the resources that you have available in this particular area.
Thanks, Brad. So I think our next issue really is just coming around some action items and our next steps. And I think we as a board have a lot of information to digest from all the presentations that were provided. So I don't really want to commit to next steps or action items at this point until we have a board that's had a chance to review everything, have some conversations, and then work with our current staffing to engage everyone who was invited today to come up with some next steps.
Can I chime in for a second?
Yeah.
Thanks. So one of the things that we as the cities recognize is you all are not a lobbying organization. And so we recognize a lot of the things that we've talked about on code changes may not necessarily be directly relevant to Verdant. But I think one of the strengths that we have is we have been mandated by our community to make the case and do all of this background research. And so one of the things that we see as an asset in this partnership is you don't have to do that background research. That research is, there's a need, is there. And so we are happy to provide any information you all need to help make that case and those connections. Where I think we're all excited is we now have plans ready to go, but we have to figure out how do we get from A to Z. And so that is where I think Verdant and your partnerships with the community, creative thinking, that's the exciting part for us as cities as we're talking. And so we're open to those dialogues. And I hope that it doesn't lead to analysis paralysis, but more of, okay, what are the next steps because we know there's a need. We can demonstrate that there are proven solutions. We just need to be let loose to all work together on them.
Thank you.
I would say too, Bob, just to clarify, action items are just things I need to do or committed to do as a result of this. So that includes sharing the presentations with everybody. So you'll get this recording as well as the slides. That'll be the action item. But I wanted to make sure if there's anything else of like, send this report or that seemed to, those will be action items for me. So I'll send them, but no action items of
Typically in our board meeting, our action items mean that we take.
So I will do that.
Take a vote on something.
Is done.
Excellent. Mary Jane had a hand up. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to add, we have research and materials too. So I think among us, we're all gathering information. So if one of us can't answer something, perhaps our planners from another one of our entities can. You know, as you went around the group here, you talked quite a bit about homelessness. So I think one of the things you might want to look at is, are you really looking at affordability writ large, or are you looking at working at a particular end of this? So that's a question for you to answer, but then what we can provide for ideas, thoughts, et cetera, about how to partner would be different depending on which end of the spectrum or whether you're looking at the whole spectrum. I will just add that right now where we are as a county is that people who are homeless are being housed in the two most expensive ways possible, and that is in jails and in emergency departments. Yep. There is no more expensive way to house people than what we're doing right now. So I just wanted to add that for thought and consideration.
Agreed.
Thanks. Yeah. So anything we've learned tonight, there's not a lack of information or studies or consultants that have weighed in on what the issues are and how to start to resolve them. Jess, you want to have a quick hand up?
Yeah,
there?
To piggyback off of MJ's comment about homelessness, I think there's a lot of research that shows housing in general has a big impact on health. Children's mental health, having a home, a consistent place to live, chronic disease management. I've had a lot of conversations with folks at like the Kidney Center about trying to make sure that people have places where they can reliably engage with dialysis, right, to be able to stay alive. So there's a lot of various ways that housing and health connect. I think homelessness is a really obvious one, but there are lots of ways that Verdant can engage in that conversation. That's not just, it's both and, I guess I would say.
Yeah, I stated homelessness, but obviously it's much broader than that. It's so housing insecurity. Yes, Dina.
I was going to say, there was a slide that was shown that showed a bunch of the partnerships that somebody was working with. I think one of the most important points moving forward is that we know from the cities which groups they're actually working with right now, because that's one of our strengths, is working in partnerships. So including like the county as well, what partnerships you are working with, because I noticed some of them are the ones that we are already doing things with. So being able to actually look at that and figure out not only just the partnerships, but what those partnerships are around, because we look at wraparound services, we look at the mixed use, we looked at a lot of other things over time, and it would be great to have more information specific about where those opportunities lie.
Great. Yeah, we have all that information, and Zoe will be sharing it with us as an action item.
That's right. Yes.
All right. Again, I want to thank everyone who participated tonight. It's been a great discussion. I think It's been really valuable for the commissioners to hear firsthand from the cities about and the county about what's going on. And so we greatly appreciate everyone's effort and the time they've taken out on an evening to share with us. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn our meeting and have a nice evening.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
You can probably stop recording now, TW.